Welcome to our podcast. I guess we might post this on both.
Yeah.
Mystics and Muons and Stories of Awakening. It's been a while since either of us podcasted. And so we thought we'd get on and talk about some of the stuff that Vale's been learning and practicing, and kind of blends both of our interests on somatic nervous system regulation and relationships and spirituality and philosophy. So, yeah, I'm curious if anyone's watching and feedback about the episode and what you're interested in hearing. I've got a couple episodes coming up, so hopefully I'll start doing some podcasts again. One coming up next week on AI and consciousness, and one next month on AI and occult and consciousness. So,
Yeah.
do you want to share the somatic stuff that you've been doing?
Sure. So in the last 6 months, I would say I have been practicing different things. Actually, one episode has been released last week about something else that I was diving into, even if I'm not a practitioner of that, which is called the emotion code. You can have a listen to that too, which is a super powerful modality that I discovered just recently. And also, I've been diving deep in somatic work and something that is being called nervous system regulation, biofield integration. And I found it randomly, like often happens for me, but I really felt a strong call to practice it and receive the healing of this modality. And my teacher, which is called Gabriel, he is from South Africa, and he lived with tribes in Africa and also in South America. And what he realized is he basically was learning a lot about the way they live, and he was comparing a lot about those traditional ways of living in the Western society and how we live. And one thing that he said when he was basically describing this work, that I always repeat every time that I try to explain this work to other people, is that when he was living with this tribe in Africa, he realized that kids weren't crying, and I think he heard the first kid crying after 2 months that he was living with this tribe, and he realized, oh my goodness, I didn't hear crying any kid until now, and the reason why this kid was crying is because he was very sick. And so he started to observe and try to understand how that was happening, and he realized that the reason why kids weren't crying was because the parents and the whole tribe actually was really attuned to their needs. So parents were anticipating their needs before it was too late and then they needed to cry. And parents didn't look so overwhelmed because they weren't alone taking care of them. There was a whole group of people, all different ages. These kids were running around the village playing with other kids, but also with other grown-ups and all different ages. And he realized that we are missing this in the Western world. We are in family, they're very separated from other people. There are just two people usually taking care of the kids, and we are not attuned to them in the same way. He gave an example of this kid there was this mom with this kid on her back, and at some point she was walking. At some point she stops and take the kids and put him on the floor, and she squats, and the kid poops, and she cleans it up, and she put him back on her back. And what he realized that she felt that the kid needed to go to the bathroom even before the kid said anything, which is very different from what we do here in the Western world. Usually we had, how do you call nappies? Diapers. We have diapers, and until, the kid is crying, maybe even desperate, and so we don't realize it, or we don't clean them, or and they stay with their own poo for a long time. So it's a completely different way of attunement and dealing with kids, and that has definitely have a huge impact on then young adult and grown-ups with time. We don't learn how to feel each other and attune to each other in a way that can be very healing. And also he was sharing how if there is some tension between two members of a tribe, and we are talking about healthy tribes. Of course, not all tribes are healthy, but if there is some tension between people in the tribe, what happens is that everyone gathers with these two people and work through the emotions and work through whatever issues they are dealing with it. So the people are not left alone in dealing with their own emotions or their own problems. Is a collective work. And when he said these things, it really resonated with me, and I really felt that this is the way that humans are supposed to live. But oftentimes we are left alone in feeling our emotions. There are no parents, because maybe parents are already so overwhelmed. They actually don't help us process any of our emotions, and so we end up dissociating or exploding with emotions, really not able to regulate ourselves. Because to be able to self-regulate, you need to have a co-regulation when you're a kid. Am I talking too much?
No, it was funny because I think you started this course around the time that I started listening to the Telepathy tapes. Mm-hmm. And so you were going through and telling me these things. Meanwhile, I was listening to the Telepathy tapes, which, if anyone hasn't listened to, is pretty popular podcast that came out late last year and focuses on these severely autistic, so nonverbal autistic kids who the series shows have this telepathic link, usually with their mother. It's usually with somebody who is really involved in their development, and but then it's beyond just that. So, and I think it did a really good job of discussing something that's traditionally considered woo or pseudoscientific, and giving some pretty good proof for it, but then circling back and explaining how that fits within scientific or a logical or rational paradigm, although you have to deconstruct materialism. So as I was listening to that helped me kind of conceptualize what you were telling me about your because you do this in group calls with Gabrielle, and I guess for me, I think it's helpful to think about how the nervous system trains itself, which is very similar to like AI training itself. But like when you're born as a baby, I think it's helpful just to view like you're this like miasmus of information, sensory input, lights, sounds, colors, temperature, but you haven't like bundled any of those together. You don't know that, oh, this is vision versus this is smelling versus this is touch and proprioception. And so you just got this like massive overload of sensory information, and your nervous system develops by recognizing patterns along the way. Like, okay, these things are associated together. And like when this person, you first bundle it up by like vision, hearing, like the different senses, but then eventually when that like blob comes near you, that then you get fed milk and then you feel better. Well, I guess first notice that there's this like sensation that you have that you don't like, and then you cry, and then it's not conscious, but you recognize that certain patterns happen and they repeat, and you can bundle things together, both senses as well as people and objects. And I think, at least for me, what happened is, I've used space-time, like three-dimensional space-time, as just a lens that we filter the universe, the one reality, through. And in my development, and a lot of people, and I think particularly in the Western world, those information, those patterns that we weren't able to predictably recognize, as well as that they weren't useful for us to get our needs met, we just kind of discarded them and focused our attention on the things like thinking or vision that helped. And so I think the way I conceptualize it is, you guys are working on accessing somatic sensations or feelings that don't really fit into, vision or touch, or, it's some sort of thing that sometimes people call, it's not a hard line between feelings, emotions, thoughts. But yeah, and then you're learning to recognize them, but then also the connectedness between people within a group.
Yeah. So how my teacher explained it was, the work that we do is really somatic. So we start really with feeling the sensations in the body. And he says that a group of sensations in the body, is categorized by emotions, with emotions, that it becomes an emotion. And then an emotion can create a thought. Yeah, it's all interconnected. It can also go on the other way, from a thought to an emotion to the sensations. But so it's a group work, and I think it's more powerful in groups. And I think that's what is really important to do at this time. I think in history, it's really learning how to feel each other again, and really realize that we are not alone in feeling whatever we are feeling. And this also really helps develop a lot of empathy for other people. Is really the most impactful work that I've done so far. And especially for empaths or highly sensitive people, this is something that probably they have done all their life, but they didn't have a name for it, or they don't have control over it. And I am an HSP, an highly sensitive person. And so growing up in my family, that it wasn't super safe, what I did was trying to basically predict and sense any little change in my environment in terms of emotions. So if I could perceive that someone was getting angry or upset or whatever it was, I was just trying to either calm the person down, please the person, or like remove myself from the situation. But usually I was trying to really attune to the person and try to calm the person down. So for me, it was a survival mechanism. And the problem with that growing up, you start to think that you need to process everyone's emotions, so you need to calm everyone's down. And you don't have much control over it. I really realized with this work that sometimes I was entering a room and I was completely dissolving. I wasn't actually feeling any of the stuff that were going in with, internally for me, but I was actually starting to feel the vibe of the place. And it can be useful, reading the room, that's what it means. But if you don't have control over it, you start to feel emotions, you don't know how to manage them. And it's just, you tend to avoid then crowded places or things like that. So with this work, I finally started to separate what I am feeling from what other people feeling. And I'm still learning how to, when I can help other people process their emotions and when actually I don't have the bandwidth for it. So it has been very, very powerful. And this type of work that we are doing is how my teacher calls it, is a mix in between somatic experiences, parts work, and also family constellation. So you can really see if it's a group of people, it becomes a constellation. It becomes every person in the group takes on a role. Whatever emotion we are feeling, there will people that will resonate with you, and they will bring some sort of information into the group to make it more complete. I don't know. Does it make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah. I think you and I are both on two separate ends of the spectrum, and it's interesting to figure out why and how that happened. So I think it's helpful to understand what's the driving factor on how nervous systems develop, which, if you think of attachment, it's just what you learn, the patterns, you learn the working models, you learn the frameworks by which you view the world based on what meets your needs for safety and attachment and keeps your caregivers close. So you're on the HSP, or the highly sensitive person side of the spectrum, where you pick up emotions really easily. You can get overwhelmed by watching shows like violent, dramatic stuff. I don't quite understand it because I don't feel this way at all, but that's painful. Do you feel physical pain when you see people going through physical?
It's like I am living that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because in science, all of this stuff I think is best explained through a more philosophical and idealism and a spiritual lens. But you can, if you look deep enough, you can find some way to map it onto a materialist worldview. And so you can look at mirror neurons. Well, you can look at it as your brain screwed up in terms of really mapping on the emotions and the physical feelings that are happening on the screen to that's happening to you. So if you need to do that, I think you can, but that has some limit. So you're on that end of the spectrum, whereas for me, I often end up watching dramas or tragedies or stuff because it's cathartic for me, because I can't. So your childhood, you learned that if you could really plug into kind of in a hypervigilant way, what everybody was feeling, you could predict it, but then you could also, like, if you meld your nervous system with them, you can dilute some of their feelings and help regulate them. So it's kind of which is what parents are supposed to do for kids. My situation, I mean, you're an only child. I had 4 brothers. So my situation was, I was a middle child. I had really big emotions. There was a time when, my explosions, tantrums, whatever, were getting dangerous for my siblings. And so there's a time when I was, on the almost taken to stay inpatient at a psychiatric facility. So my nervous system got the message that, okay, feelings are not safe. If you continue on the path that you're on and feeling them and letting all that information through, then you will get abandoned. And so the best strategy for me, to keep my caregivers near me, to get my needs met for safety, is to cut off, dissociate away from those feelings, and or to transmute them into thoughts or distractions or whatnot. So I'm at the end of the spectrum where information stuff's trying to get processed, but I'm just not aware of the feelings or the emotions. And so my ADHD continues to go up and up and up. And so watching things that can elicit and kind of unclog those pipes in media or music is how I've kind of get things unstuck. But it's 2 separate ends of the spectrum, which is interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And, what is, trauma is a curse and a gift, right? So we actually leave certain experiences. So my house wasn't that safe. So I developed this way of surviving, which is also a skill, for example, for the work that I'm doing, being a coach and helping people process emotions is a very useful skill to have if you have control also over it. And I think for you, in the programming, in tech, in science, it's very useful to have a very powerful mind and not needing to, feel as much as I do. So I think we develop exactly in the way we needed. It's just that nobody explained us why things happen for us in childhood.
So we should get into the weird side of this. So
yeah,
you have all this information. It's kind of like the way we view DNA. That's oh, this is all junk DNA, but it's just because we actually don't understand what's going on there. And the same thing with entropy and chaos and that type of stuff. It's more reflection of what patterns you can recognize, what order you can see or not. So when we're born, you have the full palette of information coming at you. And some people, like me in particular, really, for me, it was much more helpful to be in my brain and analyze things because I couldn't control other people's emotions. Mm-hmm. And it was too painful to feel the thing. So if I divert my processing power to analyzing and predicting, I can get out of the situation. But so you have that full spectrum of information coming in, but then it's just not useful anymore if some of that information doesn't help you for you to continue monitoring it. But then I think you have experiences, these liminal experiences, whether it's the ego deaths that you go through and breakups or losing jobs or whatnot, or psychedelics. There are times when that information that you've stopped listening to breaks through and you realize, oh, there's actually some pattern there and some utility. So for me, I was going through divorce and moving and changing jobs, and was going through this fairly bizarre Kundalini awakening. And I remember when I went to this meditation retreat, and I had just met you, I think a couple of weeks before, and I was feeling all these things, sensations in my body, like during this Kundalini awakening process that I hadn't felt before. And so, like, yeah, that floodgate was open of these things that I had shut off. And I remember during one of those meditation sessions, like an hour or two long session, one of the feelings that I had started feeling during this Kundalini awakening, which is sort of similar to like going down a roller coaster or like going over a bump in a car, that kind of feeling.
Of emptiness. I feel like emptiness.
Well, it's more like excitement,
yeah,
or like a little bit of bliss, joy or something.
Yeah.
So I felt that, but it was like stronger than normal during one of these meditation sessions. And I remember thinking that was odd. And I don't know why I thought to, but it was odd enough for me to like look at the clock and note when it happened. And then it happened two or three times during that like hour to 2 hour meditation session. And then I went over to my phone afterwards and saw that it was exactly lined up to the minute of when you were texting me. And I had some experiences like that during that week, and then it largely went away. But when I hear you talk about the sessions that you have, so obviously you were thinking about me, and there's some like energetic or whatnot connection, and I was operating in a way that I could feel those things and recognize somewhat of a pattern, but not enough that I was able to train it. But why don't you talk about like, so you have these sessions and you feel things, and I guess the kind of the telepathic or the nonverbal communication side of things.
Yeah. For some reason, telepathic to me is just more mind stuff. Here is more body stuff. But yeah, it's similar. So in our groups, usually our teacher will talk about a subject and it will create some trigger.
These are online groups.
Online, yeah. But of course, you can do it also in person, and it will trigger some sort of reaction. It will resonate with some people in the group, and so the person that is actually either in fear or has strong sensation in the body or start crying or whatever it is will start exploring. And what is for me was really mind-blowing is realizing that, for example, I feel a strong pressure on my chest. Many other people will feel that sensation in their body at the same time. And it happened when other people were exploring, and actually I was feeling in my body exactly the same sensation, a very similar sensation. Or what happened also is that because it's a constellation, is actually one person is feeling super joyful and the other person also super sad. So there is also the opposite. But all the people that resonate with a specific subject or specific emotion will have some sensations in their body, and each of the people will actually play a role in moving through that specific issue or emotion. And so we are all parts of that, all parts of the processing of that information. And that really made me realize that we are all one, and thinking that someone that is suffering from the other side of the world is not going to affect us is really just an illusion, because we are really all connected. And what we do in these groups is, if someone, for example, was abandoned when he was a kid, he didn't have the care that he needed, it means that he's missing some information in his biology. And that means also that he will always feeling like he's missing something throughout his life, and he will always very, very easily will this feeling of abandonment will be triggered in him or her. And then with this work, since it's a group work, there are all these people that are bringing different information from their lived experience about the specific subject. And so is gonna basically integrate in the biofield, which some people might call aura, but I know there is a lot of stigma around this name, but in the biofield of the person and the group. So you become more whole, and the information that you should have received as a kid, you receive it now. And so you don't have to feel or get triggered every time that a specific thing happened, because it is reminding you of your childhood.
Yeah, and this kind of reminds me of a little bit of a tangent. I'll try to make it short. This idea of kind of dissociative identity disorder, but also dreams. So there's this study that showed that dissociative identity disorder, like multiple personality disorder, which is essentially like several different identities or egos or personas within one mind. And so there's a study that showed that if you asked somebody with DID to recall their dream, at some percentage of the instances, you asked multiple different alter egos and they would all recall the same dream. They all experienced the same dream, but they were different characters in the same dream. And so if you think about that, which I think is like the most helpful model for one of the most helpful models for reality, this idea of a dream of like, we're all experiencing the mind, the universe, the one, from different perspectives. And we're separate individuals in some sense, but at the same time, there's no separation. You consider that dream, like each of those would have a different rendering of reality, depending on if one of those alter egos believed in magic and supernatural stuff, like they would be experiencing that in the dream. Whereas the other person that they were like interacting with, if they were a skeptical, atheist, like all of that would be filtered out or rendered in ways that they would say, no, that didn't happen. It was this or that. And so, but at some sense, at some level, both of those alters do have some connection to everything that's going on. And so it's the same way with like these somatic experiences and emotions. And I had this neat experience a few weeks ago where our 8-year-old had been, Ashton had been, upset, kind of seemed like he was acting out about things. And I had seen, they had some letter from some girl at school saying that they weren't friends, they were just buddies. It was kind of this, something that I looked at. I was like, I'm sure he's hurt by this, but he kind of brushed it off. Anyway, like a day or two after I saw that, I was sitting down with him at bedtime, and we've been trying to talk to them more about feelings and like where things feel in their body and help them like reactivate to some degree. Because, the 8-year-old's more like me thinking, or to like keep in touch with these things so that they can recognize these patterns. So with Ashton, I was like, how do you feel? Like, let's check in with your feelings. So we like took some time, and I like went first, and I was like, I'm feeling, because I'm working on this too. I was like, I feel some sadness. And he was curious. He was like, about what? And I was like, I don't I don't really know, because I think that's one of the things too, is like you don't have to necessarily have a story for it. But I was like, maybe it's about this. I'm not sure. And then like he checked in. He's like, yeah, I also feel some sadness. And I was like, well, what is it about for you? He's like, for me, it's about that girl. Like, I've tried to be friends with her and I've tried to do this and like nothing works. And then I like checked in and I was like, I feel some anger. And he asked me what about, and I was like, it's this situation that's going on. And I did have some story for it because I was feeling that I wasn't quite in touch with. And then he was like, yeah, I feel anger too. Like I'm kind of angry about the situation too, because I've tried to do this and that. And so it like felt to me like we were both like reaching into this like black velvet bag into the universe of these emotions, these experiences to be had. And like we both kind of like really felt into it. Like we could feel the same thing, but in both of our realities, like we had some story, usually have some story of like, oh, it's because of this or that. Sometimes you don't. If you're like so plugged in, you won't know. And you should get in the habit of just feeling things to let them pass and to integrate it without necessarily needing a story and get caught into it. But it was just like a really neat experience for him to get more in touch with his emotions, but also for me to see how this worked of like, oh yeah, there is it's like islands. They look separate, but when they go underwater, like they actually all connect.
This is what kids need, and probably you didn't receive it when you were a kid, but parents that feel emotions with them and co-regulation, basically, kids feeling that you feel them. And that's how they also with time learn how to regulate themselves. And I really can say that this work, you maybe can also confirm it, but has really changed me. Not that I don't get triggered anymore, or that I don't, like they're super strong and nothing can, destroy me. But I feel more whole. And also when we have some kind of tension between us, some kind of discussion, I think not all the time, but now sometimes we are able to focus on the feelings instead of saying, I'm feeling this because it's your fault, or, I'm feeling this because you did that. And actually, we can just say, oh, I'm feeling this. And the other person says, okay, I'm feeling it with you. And, we process it in this way, which I think it really helps in, making us feel closer and not getting into the stories and not getting into very huge fights.
Yeah, going back to the kind of using the dream analogy too, there's this one like hypothesis of why we dream it, or how we dream, which I think is useful. It's like there's these low level patterns from kind of the primitive brain, from the brainstem, that get transmitted up into the cortex, and the neocortex, which is like giving the story of things. It's like Inside Out, where it like feels, okay, this is shame, so like we need to like put the shame dream on up, like let's do the school one where we're like in our underwear. So there's like feelings that come up, more primitive feelings, and then consciousness wraps them in a story. And I think what I've noticed with us as we become more aware of this is like anger or sadness or something will come up that usually will have gotten carried away of like, oh, it's because Vale is doing this or what. But this gives a little more of a pause of like, okay, maybe this is not anybody's fault. There's just like pain to be felt or grief to be moved through, or like restlessness. And yes, I could be unknowingly cast into a story as an actor where I'm fighting it out with you, or we can like sidestep and find some other way to process it and actually become more connected to it. And this kind of happened with my like ADHD and restlessness, is like we understand how we process things differently. It was just the other day where I realized that for me, I have all this like pain and like kind of mental, emotional pain that is there, but I've just tuned it out, and I either dissociate from it, or I'm like stuck in thoughts, or like throw myself into projects, but it'll be there. And like, there's this restlessness that I'll like turn on some music, or like I, want to talk about this thing or that thing. And that used to trigger you more. But now that you know that that's my coping mechanism, like that can be a signal to you that like, hey, I need help with something. And instead of like, oh, he's always distracted, he's always this, we can come together and you can help me get in touch with these things and me not feel alone, and vice versa. I think you're on the other end of the spectrum where like you'll have all these emotions come up, and because you were processing so much for other people, you're also not used to processing it yourself. And so you'll lead with that. So like everything that's coming up, it's less and less now, but everything that's coming up, like you'll put out there, and sometimes you'll feel like it's my fault. And then I'm overwhelmed because I already have, just as much stuff that I'm dealing with on my plate, but I'm just, keeping it to myself. And now I need to like take on and,
yeah. And it's fun last thing. And then maybe we can do a part 2. Who knows? But yeah, even like I think you learn that to process stuff because you don't feel them, you talk, right?
Yeah.
And so for you, my reaction to say, no, please don't talk to me about all these details because it's overwhelming for you, at the beginning, I think was triggering you because, oh, she's not interested in me at all or what I have to say. But for me, everything that someone says, I process it somatically. It's very draining and painful if you don't know how to work with it, and if you don't know how to put boundaries. So I think now you also understand me more and why I need maybe less words, and more feelings in the, if you need to tell me something, you can tell me little by little, because I process a lot and I'm very sensitive to anything that you say. So I think we are learning how to work with our opposite way of.
And this comes up in your group too, where there'll be people that'll just talk and talk and talk, and that'll trigger your like, this person's just talking.
Well, it will trigger painful sensations in the body, like the body will take over, and then there is the story. Yeah.
And really what's going on is that person, they don't know how to process it. To them, it's just a story. And like, and you kind of have that story of like, oh, these people just talk at me, because that's your kind of protection, your defense mechanism against being sucked into that dynamic. But yeah, you're figuring out ways where you can tell the person that like guide them away from the story. It's like nonviolent communication. It's like, oh, so you feel like this deep, deep sadness and grief because of this story, and like you need to be seen, you need to be loved, and like you're helping summarize and like distill down. Yeah, it's not really about your brother, it's not really about the coworker, but it's about this pain. And then you're also helping connect them back down to the feelings. The other thing that you talked about with this is that like you feel stuff, and then Gabrielle like will know how what you feel shifts, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It will. Our teacher, and now we're all learning how to do that, is also sense when the sensation in the body change in the other person.
Yeah, and I think you could say, oh, it's like they can see something on the screen or something, but it sounds like it's even deeper than that. So,
yeah.
Anyway, well, I guess we can put his links to more about him, but this is just what we kind of been up to, is somatic nervous system stuff and kind of integrating our interests and using it to heal and grow. And so,
yeah. Yeah. If you have any question, feel free to ask. I will be more than happy. We will be more than happy then to answer.
And look for some AI stuff hopefully soon on my podcast.